Our first presentation of the day is from our friend Mark Bridgers of Continuum Capital. Mark's bio is in your app. Mark has been also a long-time friend of Kurt's. In fact, we were reminiscing the other day. He was here when one of his kids was born, if you can believe it. So I felt so guilty about that. We sent him a big box of toys, and he told me that his now grown son, I believe it is, still has the little rabbit from that, or teddy bear from that box of goodies that we sent him, recognizing the new arrival years and years ago. So we're going to invite Mark to the podium, and as he comes, Herb Strong is 75 years strong today. Herb, stand and be recognized, and we're going to wish you a happy birthday today. Wow. Herb is in great shape. He's physically, mentally, spiritually, in every way. He's a fun guy. He's a hard worker. He's a longtime supporter. And Herb, thank you again for your sponsorship of this event, you and your organization. We appreciate it, and I trust that you'll have a really good birthday, you and Kathy, today. All our best wishes for the many years to come. Mark, come ahead and share with us. We're eager to hear what you have to share.
Thank you, Greg. So Greg alluded to this, and it's shocking how many years have passed, but my son will be 24 this year. And like, how in the world could that much time have passed? He was born 2 weeks early, and so I was actually at the conference when my wife went into labor and then was able to depart. And the conference was at Disney World, and so he got a basket of various characters. His favorite was Buzz Lightyear, which he actually still has, believe it or not. But anyway, today I want to talk a little bit about how AI is impacting the field, and I'm going to introduce a concept to you that we're calling Generation Centaur. Now, those of you who are students of Greek history will know that the Centaur was a combination of horse and man, and sometimes women. Okay? And so this concept is built around the idea of how AI is either going to be a collaborative tool that we can use together in the field, or an integrated tool that gets used in the field. And so as we kind of walk through this will help you kind of think through what the implications are. I want you to scan the horizon. I'm going to take you into the future, approximately 2040, and this will help you think through what the future might hold. At the end of the materials, I'm going to introduce what's called a scenario. How many of you have experience with what's called scenario planning? A couple of you. So scenario planning is built around this idea that traditional planning exercises, by definition, are linear in term. How do you take where we stand today in revenue, project that forward using some type of linear algorithm, linear regression potentially, and forecast what the revenue might be? How do you look at cost, recruitment of people, which customers we might do business with? All of these concepts are driven by this mathematical construct that we can use linear regression as a forecasting tool of what the future might hold. Scenario planning, though, is built around this idea that in some time periods we have more transformational change, a stair-step function, where something underlying has changed, and we can't use history as an effective way to forecast the future. Now, those of you who have been in the business long enough will remember in the early 2000s there was a very dramatic increase in steel prices that were used in rebar, steel erection. In 2003, if you had used the last 30 years of steel pricing in your modeling of what future steel prices were going to be in your next bid or your next estimate, you would have been off by a factor of 3 as to what steel pricing was. Okay? And it doesn't matter what construct you used, using linear regression or forecasting, you could not have gotten to the place that steel went to. That's where scenario planning can come into play, where we look at it and say, what would happen if the price of steel doubled or tripled during the period that we were executing this project? How would we deal with that? Okay? So that's going to be at the very end. As you think through this concept, I want you to focus on this idea of augment as opposed to replace. Many of you have probably been reading about AI and about how it's going to displace and change jobs. In the construction industry, it's our view that AI is simply going to augment work in the field as opposed to replace workers in the field. Does that follow for everybody? And I'm going to introduce 3 ways that that's going to happen. So I want to give you a little bit of history first. The basic constructs of AI are ancient. Okay? So there's what's called a mnemonic device that is a construct to store data, organize that data, and recall that data. Now, by a show of hands, how many of you were in middle school orchestra or band? And remember the mnemonic, every good boy does fine. You remember what that stood for? Those are the notes on the treble clef. Okay? That's a mnemonic device. That is data stored, organized, and retrieved. Does that follow for everybody? Okay? Now, how many of you recognize to this point? 30 days, half September, April, June, and November. All the rest have 31. Except for February. Okay? A mnemonic device to help you remember how many days are in the month. Another example, the knuckles. Anybody remember this one? Every knuckle is a month with 31 days. Every point in between is a month that doesn't have 31 days. January, February, March, April, so forth and so on. Okay? These are devices that were developed to help us store data, organize that data, retrieve that data. This was followed by the printing press 600 years ago. This was a way to take knowledge and information and put it in the hands and the heads of the masses. Prior to this point, you had to be a monk who had a library and were transcribing script in order to turn it into handwritten books, which made the information inaccessible. This was followed by rudimentary calculators that allowed human capacity to be expanded to perform mathematical calculations that can be done manually. They just simply took much longer to perform that way. This was followed by the Turing machine that was invented in the 1940s as a way to break the Enigma code that the Germans had invented. This became the modern construct for computer sciences today. Then this was followed by, some of you remember this, when IBM challenged Gary Kasparov and then crushed Ken Jennings on Jeopardy. Computing capacity exceeded human capacity in trivia and chess at that point. In the 2000s, Amazon began a concerted effort to figure out how to use AI. What the tools were designed to do was to, when you shopped on the internet, what items did you search for? How many pages did you scroll through? Which items did you linger on? Which items did you check pricing on? Which items did you place into your cart? How long did you spend on the site looking at these items? And then that led into advertisements that the next time you showed up at the site that you would receive based on that artificial intelligence that assessed. Based on these set of characteristics, this is what that person is interested in. Does that follow for everybody? How many of you have had the terrifying effect of talking about something with one of your family members, getting online 2 or 3 hours later, and then miraculously an advertisement showing up for that item that you were discussing? Okay? How many of you are terrified by that? As Ken Jennings said, our computer overlords will be here shortly. In the 2010s, you have virtual assistants that can sense, perceive, reason, engage in a way that seems intelligent. I suspect many of you have seen your kids ask questions to Alexa and Siri and get responses. You're like, how the hell does it provide that feedback? In the teens, you started to see the acceleration of autonomous vehicles. Many of you have probably taken a Waymo taxi. Okay, anybody from Phoenix, California? In the 2020s, OpenAI's first generative AI tool came into being. This was followed by ChatGPT. This brings us all the way back. After 600 years of progress, we have taken and we have now put knowledge and information back into the hands and heads of the masses through this tool. How many of you have used ChatGPT to help write an email, to craft a response to your boss, to help you think through how to position sales messaging? Okay, let me give you a simplistic example here. My younger son graduated from high school last year. He was 18. As many of you have experienced, 18-year-old boys or men oftentimes make bad decisions, piss off their mothers. He had done this, and his mother, as an 18-year-old, you can't send him to his room any longer, kind of. And so you're in this quandary, so she laid into him. She got up the next morning. There was this beautifully crafted letter of apology that he had written and left on her desk. And as she read it, a tear welled up into her eye. And she was like, I can't believe our son is capable of this. And I was like, well, I actually don't believe it. A little investigation later, it turns out ChatGPT had a significant contribution to that communication. That pissed her off even more. So what does the future hold? The future is going to include this idea of Generation Centaur, where we have got these AI tools integrated into the field, and they are going to become part of everyday life. They're going to become part of everyday workspace, and they're going to be second nature. Generation-wise, the current generation that'll start entering the field workforce and the construction workforce in about 2035 is the group of people that I'm talking about. So born between about 2015 and 2030, which is roughly the duration of a generation. Those individuals, as they start to enter the workforce in 2035, that's the Generation Centaur that I'm referring to. All right, so this novice to expert concept. How can you use artificial intelligence to raise the performance of an individual, a novice individual, and cause that novice individual to perform like an expert? So when you look backwards in time, pre-2008, the typical timeline for someone to be promoted from the trades to foreman, 8 to 12 years would have been typical. The promotion from foreman to general superintendent, anywhere from 10 to 15 years. And you've got a situation where today, because of expansions in construction activity, because of baby boom retirements, because of ups and downs in the construction industry that cause people to abandon the construction industry, so forth and so on, you see foremen, highly skilled, maybe very knowledgeable and smart, but not necessarily experienced, promoted to foreman roles, and then later promoted to superintendent roles. If a 20-year superintendent knows 100 things that could wreck production on a job, how to avoid those things, how to plan around them, how to mitigate those risks, how to do it before they get on the job site, that's what you expect out of that superintendent. That's the job that they're supposed to be performing. If you promote somebody to superintendent who has 5 to 10 years of experience, maybe they know 50 of those things. That by definition means they're going to spend the next 10 years learning the other 50 on your jobs. Is there a better way? And the answer is, of course. What's the upside? This is a chart that we created from some analysis last year that looks at production in 10 different industries over the last 20 odd years. The way that this is measured is GDP, or output, based on that industry segment, and full-time employment in that segment, or full-time equivalent. Okay? So it's simplistic math. GDP divided by the number of people is production per person. Does that follow for everybody? Okay? When you look at this analysis, what you see is that the construction industry is the only industry that did not improve production during either of these two timelines that are shown here. Now, construction industry is dominated by residential construction. 60% in any given year of construction activity is residential related. Okay? And so that's what shows up in these numbers. In the industrial construction market space, there has been improvement in productivity. If there was a way to segregate industrial construction out, it would be placed differently. The simple concept of modularization that has been discussed very much at this conference is one of the things that has dramatically improved production on industrial sites. But on average, the construction industry is lacking. The transportation utility industry, which is where many of our customers are, is the second worst performing industry from a production standpoint. And then in non-durable and durable manufacturing is where many of our customers are. Those customers, because they have improved production so much, they have drugged contractors and engineers with them in that production improvement. Does that follow for everybody? And so we've got to figure out how to try to get ahead of that curve. The bottom line, the upside for production improvement in the construction industry is massive. And we're going to try to use these AI tools to figure out how to get there. We're working with a client today who has set a 3-year target to improve what they refer to as capital construction efficiency by 25%. 20 points of that is supposed to come out of the field, which is changes, removal of obstacles, figuring out how to allow the crews to spend a larger portion of the 8-hour day performing what's referred to as primary time, secondary time, or generically referred to as wrench time. So we're not talking about crews working faster. We're talking about crews getting more work done in a given day by not wasting as much time because of obstacles that are in their path. Okay? Other 5 points of that 25 is going to come from internal changes inside of the customer, the owner, where they're going to change the business process in order to streamline it and get information into the hands of the field that allows the field to help remove those obstacles out of the way. That follow for everybody? And this might sound bad. These are very simplistic things that need to be done. We're not talking about inventing something new. We're talking about very simplistic items that need to be implemented here. There simply has to be a process and a structure to go get it. So, there's 3 ways that I want you to think about the impact of artificial intelligence in the field on physical work versus thinking activities. And so, let me help you kind of walk through this. I'm from North Carolina. I happen to own a rental property. I have a lease associated with that property. When I bought this property, I hired an attorney, asked him to put together a lease that protected me in very specific ways, prevented certain types of animals and other things being in the rental property, so forth and so on. It cost $5,000 for the attorney to craft this document based on current law in North Carolina, so forth and so on. I paid the fee, moved on, got a renter. Today, I could use ChatGPT and pose the question, craft me a leasing contract with a 12-month term, with an extension of additional 12 months that prevents animals from being brought into the facility, and addresses these set of risks based on North Carolina law. And literally, in a moment, I will get a contract back that lays out all of those characteristics. Does that follow for everybody? Okay, now let me share with you the problem with that. So the way that these tools work, they are a mathematical construct. Okay, and so the way I want you to think about this is, there is what's called a normal distribution. Okay, so most of the data points are near the median or the average. Then you have data points on the extreme. Does that follow for everybody? So when you pose a question to ChatGPT, basically what it is doing is looking at all the data points that fall under this curve. Okay? And then it crafts something that falls into the median of those data points. Okay? So let's use a simplistic construct. North Carolina updates its laws periodically. All of those laws, including the ones that are out of date, fall underneath the curve. When ChatGPT pulls that information, it cannot distinguish between North Carolina law that is out of date and North Carolina law that is in date. It averages both of those together in order to produce the contract. Does that follow for everybody? As a non-attorney, I can't see which parts of the contract are not valid because they're built on out-of-date law. So, in this environment, I don't have to spend $5,000 to get this contract any longer. I take the contract that ChatGPT brought to me, I take it to my friendly attorney, he reviews it, perhaps he charges $1,500 for the review, makes the corrections, and we move on. That's dramatic efficiency and improvement in cost. Does that follow for everybody? Okay? And so that's the way I want you to think about this. That's a thinking exercise. But what we're focused on today are physical exercises in the field, the physical performance of work. So there's three ways to focus on this. One is output expansion. How can you use an AI tool to generate output expansion in the field? In the simplest sense, can an AI tool be used to identify a potential obstacle and help a project manager, a superintendent, a foreman, a crew member to remove that obstacle out of the path of the crew? That would, by definition, expand the output of that crew for that particular day. Again, we're not working faster. We simply are getting more productive time out of that 8-hour or 10-hour day. Does that follow for everybody? Okay. Second, how can we increase the capacity or the capability or expand the workforce? So there are some construction industry jobs where one of the requirements is you have to be able to lift 100 pounds. Some men, many women simply can't do that. Therefore, they cannot perform that particular activity. Is it possible through leverage devices, through an exoskeleton, through breaking up an item into smaller components, to raise the number of individuals that can perform that work activity? Does that follow for everybody? Okay. There are certain certifications that you have to perform some work activities. That falls into the same category as physically doing something. Okay. The third category, how do we raise someone who has average experience? This does not speak to their intelligence. This speaks to their experience. How do we raise somebody who has average experience and cause them to perform at the superior level? That's what we're going to focus on today with the rest of the discussion, is this third piece, this novice to expert construct. So let me give you a way to think about this. If you were to draw that normal distribution on that first chart that shows the red and the yellow and the green individuals, the vast majority of the crew members fall into that type of a construct. They're in the middle. They're the median. They're the average. That's totally acceptable and normal. And you have a few people who have deep expertise and experience. They're on the right-hand side. And you have apprentices or individuals that have just been brought into the job site who have low experience. Many of you have experience with this idea that an apprentice or a new person on a job site will wear a different helmet or a different colored vest. Okay? That's the exact same construct. How do we lower the risk of those individuals that fall on the right-hand side? So in these AI concepts, what we're trying to do mathematically is, instead of having long tails on this normal distribution and the average and the mean at a certain point, we want to move the average and the mean closer to expert and then shorten the tail on either side so that we have fewer individuals that are less experienced. Does that follow for everybody? Okay. Now, let me tell another story. My son that Greg was referring to, when I came up, when I was young, my father and I, we worked on cars, we tore apart carburetors, we tore apart transmissions, we rebuilt them. All of that work, was very mechanically oriented and helped me understand how a car functions. Today, you can't do any of that type of work on a vehicle any longer. But in the modern way, when my children were 16 and they were getting their license, one of the first things they were required to do was to jack up the vehicle on a flat spot in our driveway and change all 4 tires as a way to understand how to change a tire. So my 18-year-old son is a freshman in college. He's on his way, his first spring break, down to Florida with 4 other guys in a car. They're driving down the highway. The car gets a flat. Of the 5 boys, he is the only one that knew how to change a tire on that vehicle, okay? Now, what's interesting is, if you were to ask one of your kids, 18 to 16 to whatever, how to change a tire, I suspect the response you would get would be, I don't know how, but I know how to look it up on YouTube and I can follow those instructions. Does that follow for everybody? Okay, and so that's what we're talking about here as an example. How do we take somebody who's a novice, somebody who doesn't know how to change a tire? I taught my son the way that I learned on the job experience. It's a fantastic teacher. It just takes forever. The alternative is we could use an AI tool like YouTube. Somebody can learn to perform like an expert and change a tire effectively. Does that follow for everybody? That's moved the mean and the average to the right. That's shortened the tail, particularly on the downside in terms of experience. Okay? So, there are a couple of ways that this can impact, and the simple way to think about this is, how are we going to use these tools to accelerate the path to mastery? So again, back to where we started. You've got a general superintendent that has 8 years of experience. It would be nice if they had 20 years of experience. How do we take 12 years of on-the-job experience and pack it into the head of a person that has 8 years of experience and cause them to perform like a 20-year person as opposed to an 8-year person? Okay? AI is one of the solutions that can take us there. The things that come into play from a human standpoint are the judgment, the knowledge, the experience. What comes into play from the AI standpoint is the data analysis speed, the rapid simulation, the consistent process. Okay, and so we're going to marry those two things together. So I've got a short video here that speaks to this idea of novice to expert construct, and so I'm going to ask the gentleman in the back to bring the video.
Hey, I'm Zach Young, founder of Vulcan Line Tools, with our new product here today, Azimuth on Foot. Azimuth on Foot lets users take accurate pole measurements from an iPhone image. To get started with Azimuth on Foot, simply power on your RTK GPS receiver and connect it via Bluetooth to the Azimuth iOS app. Once your GPS receiver is powered on and connected via Bluetooth, you'll begin receiving corrections which are broadcast to the receiver and hone the GPS accuracy down to within a half an inch. Next, simply take a picture of the power pole. This will simultaneously grab a GPS reading. From here, you'll walk up to the power pole and grab one more GPS reading with the receiver right next to the pole's location. Once you've grabbed the pole's location, the measurable photograph of this pole will then be uploaded into the Azimuth web app. This allows users in the back office to instantly take accurate pole measurements in real time. No manual measurements, no second visits. Azimuth on Foot turns a 20-minute job into a 30-second scan and sends the data straight to your team. Azimuth on Foot, the future of field data collection.
So this is a tool that takes an individual and expands the number of people who can perform this particular function and dramatically accelerates the time that it takes to perform the function and dramatically reduces the cost associated with the performance of that function. You can go back to the PowerPoint if you don't mind. And so this is one of the ways you can cause that to occur. This tool is used as a precursor to line crews coming out and performing line sag measurements and replacements, pole replacements. That accelerates the performance of that crew. So not only is this particularly preparatory activity performed more efficiently, it streamlines the much more expensive construction activity that happens after that. Okay? How that would typically occur today is the crew would have an extra person assigned to them. That crew member would simply walk in front of the crew and would look at what the line sag is, take manual measurements, make a manual inspection of the pole, and then provide feedback to the crew by shouting, okay, we've got one up here that needs to be replaced, we've got a line sag problem here, we've got to do some tightening. As you get to this point, this is what you need to do, and then move forward. There's nothing wrong with that process. It just simply takes an individual that is highly experienced and takes them out of the most productive activity, which is the performance of that construction activity, and puts them into a low performance activity where that skill set is not being as fully utilized. Does that follow for everybody? This exact same tool can be used on industrial construction sites to measure steel erection and attachment points vertically and assess where they are in 3 dimensions, and then determine, do we have some issue in terms of placement from a steel erection standpoint? And figuring out how to apply these kind of tools to this environment is one of the key things. Now, these are 2 pictures of job sites. The job site on the left is a disaster. Nobody wants that. The job site on the right is what everybody's searching for. A highly skilled superintendent understands that you have to have a structured and well laid out job site. That superintendent is going to get out to the job site before the crews show up. They're going to walk that job site. They're going to visualize, where do we need to place materials? What is the order of construction? How much materials can I store on site without risk of damaging them? And then they're going to build their plan, and they're going to implement that plan. A 5 or 8 or 10-year experienced superintendent understands this construct intellectually, but doesn't have enough experience to answer all of these questions. And the way they're going to learn it is the way that everybody has learned it, looking backwards in time. Wow, this was a damned mistake. I really should have done something differently here. Next job, I'm going to fix this problem. Okay? So the AI tools can help you solve that. Here, I'm not going to read this to you, but here are 3 tools that use LiDAR, material management, lay down constructs. These tools in combination will take a superintendent or project manager who's trying to figure out, how do we structure material delivery at a congested job site and material management to avoid touching the materials more than once, and help them find that solution. Again, how do you put 20 years of experience inside the head of somebody that has 8 years of experience? That follow for everybody? All right. Here's another example. You've got safety constructs that can dramatically impact production. You've got contractors that are going to be pulled into work that perhaps they're not familiar with. You've got crews that might be inexperienced or made up of individuals that have low experience. How do you solve for that? So there are solutions that can use wearables by the crews. These can detect threats, identify risks, measure heat stress, and these items can identify and address those risks before they become relevant. Again, a 20-year superintendent is going to walk that job site, is going to think about sun exposure, is going to think about how construction is going to occur. They're going to anticipate what those risks are. An 8-year superintendent understands that intellectually, simply doesn't have enough experience to recognize all of the risks. Again, how do you pack 20 years of experience in the head of somebody that has 8 years of experience? And I'm not going to read this to you, but this is a set of tools that through the use of these sensors, movement and measurement, LiDAR, radar, can help you get your head wrapped around attacking these challenges. What we have found, back to this client I was describing for you that's on this journey for 25% efficiency, they know that there are ways to drive this performance improvement, but they don't know where to begin. So what we decided to do to help them, we identified 100 AI innovations, and we are rating them and ranking them in 6 different ways in order to help clients figure out what to do with them. Most of the people we talk to are like, I know that we need to do something different, I just don't know what it is or where to start. So what we did was, we looked at each innovation, we said, okay, what type of construction activity is this applicable to? Heavy civil, earth moving, vertical construction, linear construction. Second, who would be responsible for implementing it? Would it be something that the trades would implement? Would a foreman implement it? Would a superintendent implement it? Would an engineer or project manager implement it? Third, what type and amount of impact is expected? Okay? Those of you who've worked in the field know that the best practice is to set daily expectations. We're going to get 100 feet. We're going to install 100 sticks. It's the same thing. What is our expectation of applying this tool? Fourth, what is the timeline for implementation and adoption? Said another way, how long would it take us to get this installed and used regularly and become part of the standard operating procedure? Fifth, what does it cost in order to implement this? And sixth, what is the business case? Should we chase this? Our experience is people are overwhelmed by how to attack this and don't even know where to start. So this would allow you to search this database and say, okay, I perform transportation construction, I've got heavy civil responsibilities, of these 100 innovations, here are 7 that fit in this market space. I think I want something that's implemented by a project manager because I trust my project manager to investigate it. Here's 2 of the 6 that a project manager would implement. Does that follow for everybody? And so the idea is to give you a place to start. So, Generation Centaur. This is a scenario that we worked with a client to help craft. This is not a forecast of the future. This is one possible future. So the way to think about this is back to my steel example in the beginning. You don't have to try to figure out what is it that would have to happen to cause steel prices to double or triple. You simply say, okay, I don't really care what causes it. What I care about is what would I do in an environment and how would I deal with steel prices that were double or triple versus what they are today. And why it happened, I don't really give a damn about. And so this scenario is like that. It's not saying that steel prices are going to double. It's saying, what would we do if steel prices doubled? Okay? And so in this case, this generation that we're talking about coming into the workforce, this in some ways is similar to the earlier generation that was exposed to technology as children. And many of us have kids that iPads they were exposed to as 1 and 2 and 3 and 4-year-old kids. And today, when you have a problem with some technology, what is it that you do? You call your 16-year-old, you're like, I can't make this damn thing work, can you help me? And so that's going to be accelerated going into the future where you've got individuals that look at the use and application of AI as something that's simply part of their nature. It's something that we do in the same way that we get up and check email in the morning or check voicemail or read the newspaper. They're going to get up and use an AI tool as a wearable And that's not going to be any different than the experience that we had. It's just a different technology. Now, for me personally, I'm terrified by this. You know, like my children live life on social media. The things that they make visible on social media, I would never make visible. And when I was a kid, I wouldn't have wanted my parents to be aware of it. But children today have different perspectives, and this next generation is going to have a different perspective as well. There's 6 ways that we look at these scenarios in terms of impact. What are the political impacts? What are the social impacts, the technological impacts, the economic impacts, the legal and regulatory impacts, and the environmental impacts? This helps shape your perspective on what you're going to do. Now, there's 2 steps that are not shown here. The next step is to talk about what the implications of this scenario are, and then the 3rd step is to start to identify strategies and tactics that we would implement in order to take advantage of the scenario and those implications. Does that follow for everybody? Okay? In a typical scenario planning process, you would have 4 to 8 of these scenarios, and then what you're searching for is strategies that were identified specific to each of those scenarios that overlap with one another. Those then become the most powerful strategies that, regardless of what the future holds, would be the ones that might prove most beneficial to implement. Does that follow for everybody? Okay? And this is designed to look 5 to 15 years in the future, where the typical planning process might be 2 to 5 years into the future. So I've got one more video here that I'd like to show. So again, the gentleman in the back, I'd like for y'all to pull this up. Sounds a little bit low on this if you'd raise it.
Yours. Shoulder.
Entire left arm.
1, 2, 3.
No, that one's me.
Oh my God. Alone?
You must start a cybernetics program.
We're wounded cops. I didn't know any subject. Anybody was so extensively repaired.
Yeah, well, take it from me. You gotta read the fine print on the organ donor card. Doesn't just say what they can take out. It says what they can put back in.
So this is an example in the far future where artificial intelligence is fully integrated. That's where Generation Centaur would come to kind of the end point, where we've got these technologies that are integrated. Now, how many of you have tried these wearable glasses? Okay? So that's not an embedded technology, but it's the exact same construct, which is allow you to access those types of tools and make them part of your everyday activity. Okay? So where do we go next? Oops. As you look forward, this idea of the dramatic productivity improvement that's available to us, this is something we have to chase jointly. Because of the way that construction industry works in this industrial market space, the owner and the engineer and the contractor are inexplicably linked together. They've got to work together to solve this and to figure out how to fix these challenges. With that said, we're going to focus on this idea of how do we use artificial intelligence and machine learning in order to attack these 3 performance expansions in the field: output expansion, capable workforce expansion, and average superior performance. And then as we move forward, we've got to figure out how to utilize the perspectives of the individuals that are going to be entering the construction industry, who are going to be much more comfortable with these constructs, this Generation Centaur, and then figure out how do we cause the owner, the engineer, and the contractor and labor to work together to achieve this production improvement potential that's available to us. Again, augment, not replace. With that said, I'll take questions on any topic. I'm very opinionated. Go ahead, sir. Hang on, there's a mic coming.
We got some students with the mic.
There's a gentleman up here in the front row.
Right up here, Paige. Right up here. Thank you. And then we got some questions that have come in on the app too, Mark.
Okay.
Go ahead. Fascinating.
I have two questions. The first one's a little bit off cuff. Really? The baby boomers were going to be buried?
Yes, you are going to die.
I think all of us see this. We've got more work coming, and nowhere in the next 5-10 years, enough people coming in. And we talked about all the things over the course of this conference and other conferences of how we can accelerate people coming in and getting them out of great middle schools and start convincing them that construction is better than retail. So we're all doing that to some extent, and we got to get better at it. The reality is, the simple reality is, we need that 30 to 50% performance increase.
That's exactly right. We've got to somehow get more output of the people that choose to work in this space.
That's correct. And I think all of us see that this is where it's going.
Thank you. We got a question in the back, Trey. Andrew?
So I'm curious, I love the slides, great presentation. Do you have an opinion on Neuralink chips, and would you ever put one in your head?
I would never, but again, I'm not the right generation to ask that question to.
That's right.
Yeah, so my belief is this next generation are going to look at things like neural implants as simply a form of body modification. Just to give you a simplistic example, my mother refused to get her ears pierced, because in that era, some women did not get their ears pierced. Okay? Today, ear piercing and other body part piercing is more normalized. In the future, it's going to be different. And so that type of neural input or impact is something that I think is going to become, simply a type of body modification that individuals can choose to implement in the way that tattooing and piercings are today. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you so much. That was a great topic and good performance. My question is regarding to the benchmark. You had a good example of your rental property, and you use AI, and finally you use a benchmark with a lower price to make sure you are in the right place. In entire of the AI you present here, do you have any benchmark to say we are in the right place, or do we have anything we can trust AI give us the right answer or not?
The short answer is no. And so this is no different than any transformational activity where somebody has to work on it first, and those individuals might make mistakes. And so in our counseling to our clients, we have, I'm going to digress here for a moment, but if you look at the period from 1985 to COVID, and you looked at any measure of economic performance, of activity, of deaths from conflicts around the globe, inflation, interest rates, that almost 40-year period was exceptionally stable. And it was during that period where globalization expanded, where the idea of just-in-time management began to be adopted on construction sites in terms of bringing material, where we began to shrink inventory volumes because we didn't need inventory as a way to mitigate risks of material delivery. All these things were done because the environment we were operating in had become so stable that we could afford to take less risk. Does that follow? Okay. The period that we have entered now, post-COVID, is going to look much more like the 60s and the 70s in terms of volatility, which means that we are going to be subject to risk, and we are not going to have enough information to make, quote, the best or right decision. We have to get comfortable with this idea of we need to make a decision, and then as soon as we've determined that that decision might be an error, that we reverse course and do something different. And that type of mentality, again, just the nature of this environment, there's almost nobody in this room that was in a management position pre-1985, which means that they have no management experience with a more volatile environment like we are facing today. Does that follow for everybody? And so this idea, the question that you were asking, That's the totally appropriate question to have asked in 2015. How do we search for, mitigate the risks, and find the right answer? The question today is, how do I take action in a risk-mitigated way and then be prepared to change direction once it becomes clear I've made a mistake? Does that follow?
Let me get a couple from the, we've got several that have come in on the app, and I know there's several questions. By the way we're doing Q&A, of course, just raise your hand, be recognized. One of the folks will take a microphone to you, and then we'll go from there. Mark, what changes to our project delivery model are required to fully leverage AI-driven field augmentation? That's the first question. What are your comments on that? And then second, how do you ensure consistent adaptation across contractors, crews, and generations?
So I'll work on the second question. The individual used the word ensure consistent application.
Yeah, right.
Anybody that has ever worked with crews knows that the word ensure never is used in combination with the word crew, because there is no way to ensure that the crews are going to implement that in the field. With that said, there are ways to encourage the crew, there are ways to train and develop the crew, there are ways to help crew adapt to this environment, and that can raise the likelihood, but there is no way to ensure that. At the end of the day, there's the old joke, if it weren't for customers and employees, this job would be easy. And that statement is still going to be true in the future, okay? Because figuring out how to get the crews to adapt and use these tools is going to be the same challenge that we've always faced. How do we get crews to adapt and use new tools going forward? That's the same thing we'll face. The first question, can you read it again?
Yeah, sure. Let's see, hold on just a second. What changes to the project delivery system?
So
yeah,
in this environment, you're going to see the use of more project delivery techniques that look more design build like. And in the simplest sense, jobs are exposed to more risk, and so shortening the schedule on those jobs subjects them to less risk over that timeline. Does that follow for everybody? Okay. So one of the simplistic risks to think about is we are still in an environment that has inflation that's north of 2%. If you can cut 6 months of schedule out of the job, you've subjected that job to 6 months less inflation. Does that follow for everybody? So going back to the period of 85 to COVID, that was a very low inflationary time period. The fact that a job ran over 6 months, yes, we pissed away general conditions, yes, we probably incurred more cost, but inflation was not really one of the things that we were worried about in that time period, okay? That has changed. And so you're going to start to see higher risk decision making. This was alluded to during the panel discussion yesterday, and I'm going to paraphrase to some extent, but as contractors, we are going to see our customers make what we consider illogical and impractical decisions that then they're asking us to deal with as contractors, okay? They're not choosing that because they want to make our job hard. They're choosing it because they are facing market conditions that demand that. And so here's a simplistic example, and this was again alluded to during the panel discussion. In the construction of a multi-turbine site, the expectation would be that the exact same equipment is utilized for each of those turbines. We're going to see an environment in the future where you have 2, possibly 3 different pieces of equipment, which changes the install, changes the connection points, okay? Nobody in their right mind would choose that as a practical, logical solution. They have chosen that because they have no other choice. Our job as constructors is to figure out how to help them, okay? Not to shout at them and say, this is the dumbest decision I've ever seen made. Even though that is true, that statement is not helpful to that situation. Does that follow for everybody? Okay? So that's where I see the delivery headed, which is to something that looks more like design build and also something that raises the risks for the parties because of the nature of what's happening around us.
Let me ask another question from the app, if I may, and then we'll get to the floor. When you mention wearables, how do you discuss the benefits with the field operations crew and address valid Big Brother is watching concerns and feelings that are micromanaged, leading to potential turnover?
Yep.
When you mention wearables, how do you deal with the benefits with the field?
Yeah, so this is a legitimate issue, and again, in my generation, I feel that Big Brother is watching, and I don't like it. Okay? But with that said, using my children as an example, their lives are totally exposed on social media in a way that, I'm very uncomfortable with. But they are comfortable with it, and in that construct, they don't see that Big Brother risk in the way that I see it. Now, whether or not that risk is there is a completely different question. But they simply don't recognize it as a threat in the same way that I do. I'll use the telematics information as an example that is applied to equipment and over-the-road vehicles, okay? So the first cameras and driver monitoring systems were implemented 12 to 15 years ago, with some consistency. And some of you might remember this. At that point in time, you had the ability to buy a camera device that both looked forward and looked backwards in the sense of monitoring the driver, forwards in the sense of monitoring what was happening in front of you. The vast majority of my clients concluded that, okay, if we buy the cab-looking component, everybody's going to feel like we're monitoring them. They're not going to like that. Everybody understands why we're buying the forward-looking component in order to have a defense when we get into some type of an accident or somebody hits one of the trucks or sideswipes us. So that was very sellable. Once that concept got sold, you've now gotten to an environment where you can't really buy a technology today that doesn't look both ways, or in some instances, look three-dimensionally or 360 degrees. And yes, crews have concern about that, but it's less of a concern than it was 10 or 15 years ago, and it'll be less of a concern in another 10 or 15 years. Yeah. That's a legitimate complaint that I think that's reflective of my generation's view as opposed to what the view of a future generation might be.
Body cams with law enforcement, huge pushback back in the day. I remember earlier in my career we had drug testing pushback and background check. Every advancement has detractors.
Yes.
Every single one has a headwind, and this is no different. Let's go to the floor. Greg, way out there on the far side. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we're in construction and industry here, and I've had discussions in a variety of places across the country that we all know the need for innovation and economics of going this route. Our company actively engages with community colleges, vocational, trade schools, trying to bring craftspeople in. And we hear the comment, well, young people, they don't want to get into the trades or heavy industry, and it's not true. And we're all older people, we understand it, and there's a gap there.
Easy now with that older people thing.
There's a gap there, and the problem is that they don't know that this is out there.
Yes.
It's not being taught that these careers are out there, and it's up to us to get the message out. And so the two things that we find is, one, the young people don't know it's out there. We've got to get the word out and say, hey, these are great careers, so that they are interested. The young people we bring in, they love it once they know that it's there. Second thing is we talk to the educators. They know this is there, but they don't have the resources to make it happen. There needs to be a bridge there where industry works with and helps the education institutions who want to do this, but they don't have the resources. And I don't know how we get that, that link.
Yeah, that's a very challenging problem. Like when I was in high school, we had a horticultural lab, an auto mechanics lab, a welding lab, and a woodworking lab. I actually was involved in the woodworking lab. The individuals that ran those programs guided people to the jobs, that they were effectively guidance counselors, for those individuals. Once those characteristics left high schools in the 80s, the guidance counselors now were directing individuals to four-year schools because that was the simplest thing to do. Let me give you just one simplistic example, which is personal. And so, Greg, I hadn't told you this story, but my son, he's in his 5th year of college. He'll graduate this May. And he's on his 5th major in college. Part of the reason that he's there 5 years, as with many of us, he didn't have any idea what he wanted to do. He started out in something that was very general. I kind of counseled him to search for something that had a specific skill in it. He's ended up in a construction management major, and this past summer he did an internship out in Denver, Colorado. He ended up getting 3 job offers, one of which is approaching 6 figures in size, and he's going to end up working in the construction industry. Of his group of friends, there's 8 of them that he's close friends with. 5 of them don't have job offers and are trying to figure out what they're going to do. He ended up with 3 job offers. And so this, I think, speaks to what you were describing. How do we open individuals' eyes to the fact that we have fantastic job and career development opportunities available to people that actually want to work for a living? And so figuring out how to help people see that, I think, is one of the critical things that we've got to figure out how to do.
Paige, question? Yes.
First of all, I want to thank you. This is tremendously illuminating, especially your use of the illustrations of the normal curve. It really gave me some insight. Observations and then a question. It seems that it's obvious, it's really very critical to accelerate the training process and to give people expert skills and the advantages that those bring. But the process is something that's also interesting. Normally, the learning process is one that we've all experienced where something happens in your head where something that was not an orderly structure becomes ordered, and you see the underlying structure in it. And that is what helps you retain it. The knowledge that you're giving people is not earned in that way, and I wonder about retention and reliance. I also, in the broader sense, wonder, besides AI, 2 of the things that that are very important and we've recognized more and more are innovation and collaboration. While construction is is definitely a conservative and not innovative, has not been an innovative industry, the last 50 years are among the most, and certainly the most innovative in human history as to what has occurred and how much we've progressed. And what I'm trying to say is that how do you see AI's role in, there's that Pareto principle that 90% of the results come from 10% of the efforts. Right. In construction, we've seen that in innovations in how people work collaboratively or develop processes and procedures for doing things more effectively, like modularization, for instance. The process that you've been describing speaks well to a particular issue, a shrinking labor pool, a less experienced pool of people and how to move them along. But how can it address these other issues of, the effectiveness and the power of both innovation and collaboration, which I haven't even touched on. My particular passion is lean construction. How could AI, really relate to those?
Yep. So you got a lot to unpack there. I'm going to pick on 2 pieces of it. One is you can't implement something that you can't see. And so part of today's effort is to help make visible what is possible so that then people can say, okay, I think I can see this and I can see a way to chase it. The second step of that is to not be overwhelmed. That ties back into kind of this rating and ranking and assessment that we did, because we concluded that even though people could see that these tools could be applied, they just don't understand where to start, because it is so different, than what they have experience with. And so this rating and ranking is designed to kind of crack the door open to where you can see that. And so that's, in the simplest sense, that's the way to do it. Lean construction, as an example, the Lean Construction Institute has basically used a apostle model to try to bring lean into the construction industry, and it has begun to accelerate. You're starting to see much more discussion and use of lean principles, and it was exponentially smaller 10 years ago and exponentially smaller 10 years before that. And so they're using kind of that process to accelerate it by opening people's eyes, to the construct. The lean principles, these tools are perfectly designed to fit with the lean principles. They simply become the mechanism that you're using to drive the 8 wastes out of the construction process, or one of the mechanisms that you can use. And so I see great opportunity to collaborate. At the end of the day, though, there's very limited potential for contractors to do this by themselves in this industrial construction space, because they have to collaborate with the owners in order to figure out how to implement these things and to mitigate some of the risks. So an owner that is facing schedule issues, an owner that is facing, we've got mismatched equipment issues, that owner has escalated the risk that they're subject to. Working in combination with a contractor, an engineer, and labor resources can mitigate some of those risks. That's where this collaborative piece comes in. The place where you started in your comment is actually one of my fears, which is, I'll take those mnemonic devices that I used at the beginning. So I was in middle school orchestra, I played the cello. I still remember, every good boy does fine, because it was ingrained in me and I learned it, okay? And so I can still recall it 50 years later. Is that same learning going to happen when somebody uses an AI tool to solve a problem? And yes, it solved the problem, but is it something that becomes embedded in part of the standard operating procedure? I don't know the answer to that question. My fear is, this is kind of a worst case scenario, the Middle Ages represented a period where knowledge got lost. And so when you look backwards in time, the ancient Greeks and the Romans had solved very challenging problems, like making concrete, allowing concrete to set underwater, okay? These were concepts that got lost in the Middle Ages and weren't recaptured until many years later, decades later, hundreds of years later. Is it possible that we enter a period where people can do things but don't learn it? And I don't know what the right words are, but that's my fear when I look at it, is that, yes, somebody can change a tire, but they don't retain the knowledge of how to do it. They have to look it up again. And then what happens, and so some of you might have had this experience, what occurs if Google Maps is not available while I'm trying to drive to my next location? When I started out as a consultant, I never went to any job site without a paper map with me in case I had some disaster, because I had to have some reference point. There's no modern driver under the age of 30 that does anything like that. If Google Maps goes out, they may as well park the damn car, because there ain't no other method to move the vehicle forward, okay? And so that's an example of where, if I were to ask my children, what roads would you take to get to this destination in Raleigh, North Carolina? They say, I don't know. I can look it up on Google Maps and I can go there, but I don't know what roads to take to get there. Does that follow? And so, is that a detriment? I don't know. Is that something that wrecks this construct, to where all of a sudden the weakness is that this is not an ingrained skill, it's something that has to be puppeted, in terms of the person to implement it? And what are the implications associated with that? I don't know the answers to those questions.
For example, my phone died like the other day or the other evening while I was driving around Orlando. And fortunately, I've been here enough times that I was able to find my way back to the hotel.
Like, what would you do? Like, let's say a sunspot knocked out the cellular system. There would be 90% of the drivers would park the vehicles because they don't know what the hell to do.
That's new warfare. You can bet the Pentagon's thinking about the same thing.
All right, I've taken up too much time, Greg.
No, we're going to extend it. I've got a little elbow room on the end of our time today. We will not deprive any other presentation of their time, but this has a lot of energy to it. We got a couple of more questions. Somebody asked a governance question, which was really, really good. In here, it came in on the app. I accidentally deleted it with my clumsy fingers. So if you want to re-ask it, I'd like to have you frame that up again. In the meantime, Paige, I think you have a question there for us in the back.
So my name is Zofia Rupkowski from Texas A&M University. I'm really excited to be here. My first time at Kurtz, so I appreciate how welcoming everybody has been. In response to the comments people have made about attracting new people, I've been teaching there since 2009 after working for a number of years. But I do want to say that one thing that I learned at this conference, there's a number of people here who have left construction. So they went through programs such as ours, very rigorous, come out with fabulous salaries. The question is, why aren't they being retained? And one of the most fascinating answers came from a table of gentlemen here who basically said, the hours made it very hard for us to have a real family life. They couldn't spend time with their kids playing baseball. They were asked to work in other states and then would be sent back for maybe just, a weekend to spend time with their families. And so the question that links to your presentation is really, can we use AI to not just make projects go faster and faster and increase the expectations, but say, look, let's actually make it a more humane job site so that we can actually be more productive and actually potentially reduce the hours, create an environment that would makes people want to stay in the field, especially. And these were people who were project managers, so they weren't even craft. Yet I've met a number of superintendents who have been very well trained, and they're on the third divorce, and so the expectations have been so extreme. So that would be the question: is can we use it to just make it a more humane profession where people would want to stay?
First, I'll and I hope you don't take this as an attack, but the supposition of your question is that people want to stay home with a spouse and want to stay home with a child. And that's not true in all cases. And so you've got an environment where, yes, I think AI could be used to address some of these constructs. And I'll use a more practical example. Take modularization of construction activity. Basically what's occurring there is, instead of stick building something in the field, we're going to build it in a controlled environment and then have it shipped to that location. What that means is that the crew performing that activity, instead of being where the job site is, they're where the manufacturing facility is, which is more like what I think the supposition is that you're making, that individuals would be able to be home at night, and desire that. And so the AI tools can accelerate, that characteristic. With that said, though, construction, by definition, is a local construct, and local in the sense that the work happens where the work is demanded, and generally speaking, work is happening in places that are relatively remote, newly developed, outside of city centers, so forth and so on. There are construction industry jobs that if somebody wants to work 9 to 5 in a particular environment, there are construction segments where that is much more likely. Okay? In the industrial construction segment, in the utility construction segment, the jobs do not have those characteristics. And so somebody that desires something that would, quote, be more stable, whatever the definition of stable is, they have to choose a construction segment if they want to stay in the industry that exhibits those characteristics. And industrial construction happens to not be one of them. Go ahead.
This question is for both you guys and really for anybody in the audience. I'm thinking about this conversation about, getting folks to stay in the career and getting folks to come to the career. And we do a lot of work across the world. And I notice in places like the UK and in France, working conditions are much better. It's much more heavily unionized. Labor laws are a lot stricter. Go to a job site and you don't see a trailer. You see a series of buildings that are set up as wellness centers for the workers. There's a warm room, there's a cold room, there's a nursing room. So they really take really good care, especially in the UK. They take great care of their workers, and the conditions are much better. But I still think that they have labor shortages there. They have the same challenges. So I'm just curious, for those of you who do work in the first world, let's discount the third world because conditions are horrible and people are poor. Expectations are different. Right. But in the first world, are we doing any better job or worse job than other developed countries in recruiting and retaining workers?
So I'm gonna attack your question in a different way. So it depends on what you're solving for. So if you look at economic performance, if you look at the ability to raise wages and to rise within society, the United States has exhibited those characteristics to much greater degree than Europe in using almost any of the economic measures. And so, said another way, if you're measuring success as, something that might be more stable, France, as an example, has a requirement, once you get a full-time job, you cannot be discharged from that job. That changes the decision-making on who you hire, how you hire, why you hire, when you hire, and by definition restricts economic growth because of that constraint that is applied. That constraint doesn't exist in the United States. You can be fired for cause. You can be fired without cause. Okay, and so that flexibility, if the thing that you're solving for is faster and more aggressive economic growth, the US model might work better. If you're solving for something different, a European model might work better. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but the question still is, are we doing a better job of recruiting and retaining work?
No. And this actually ties back to something that's very simplistic. If you were to make a list of jobs and you were to ask somebody to rank those jobs, based on attractiveness, the construction industry, by definition, is going to be in the bottom half of that list. And then as you break down the types of construction activity into things that involve physical work in the field, and then physical work outside in the field, and then physical work on top of a pole or in a trench or underground, those jobs become less and less and less and less and less and less and less attractive. Okay? And so that is inherent across the globe. The fact that you're in the UK doesn't change the fact that a mining-related construction job is not particularly attractive. Does that follow? Mm-hmm. And so, having full-time employment, having a social system that supports the individual, having, something that looks more like universal health care, those are all positive things for people that desire that. Doesn't change the attractiveness of the underlying work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because all the other industries have those same.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That is exactly right.
Let me ask a final question here. And by the way, if you haven't noticed, we're adjusting the agenda by 15 minutes. We've got built-in wiggle room for that, and nobody will be shorted on their subsequent two. And by the way, we have two very wonderful presentations coming up, so you want to be on time on that. Final question: what governance or risk frameworks? Governance or risk frameworks do owners need in place to ensure that Generation Centaur AI tools enhance decision-making without creating safety, legal, and operational issues?
I honestly don't know the answer to that.
That's a fair answer.
And so the challenge is, when you implement a tool like this, I'll go back to kind of my kids' use of social media. So, when I look at it, I think, okay, do I want my entire childhood, or a big chunk of my childhood and my social activities exposed on social media? Mm-hmm. And so for me, the answer is no. I do not want that. I think about what I did in high school and college, and I thank God that there were no readily available mechanisms to take photos and post them, during that era. But they feel differently about it, and so as an employer today, one of the things that we do is we look at the available social media posting of new individuals that we're going to hire, and whether it's right or wrong, we look at the photos and the posts and the tweets and the TikTok videos and make a determination, does this person fit? And is this what we're looking for? And so in that construct, there are implications for making your life visible on social media. What those will be when you're 25 or 30 or 40 or 45, I don't really have any way to judge. I'm confident, however, that the application of these tools are going to introduce problems that are totally unanticipated, and we don't have solutions for, and that gets back to where I started, or I mentioned, we're in a more volatile time period. We're going to have to make choices without enough information, and then part of making that choice is try to mitigate the risks as much as possible. But the key thing is, be prepared to change direction on a moment's notice when it becomes clear that we've made a mistake. And that's not a characteristic that we've had to work with in the past 40 years. That's a characteristic that existed pre-85 into the 60s and 70s, where you had to make decisions with limited information, and if you made a mistake, you had to fix it. And today, we're going to have to do the same thing with the implementation of AI.
Mark, I'd like to make an invitation to you as representative of Continuum Capital, serve on our CSP advisory board.
Thank you. Accepted.
Good. We're glad to have it. Let's show our appreciation for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Outstanding.